The morning light had already begun its slow climb across the city when Armin Hale realized how tired Hope could feel. It was the kind of tired that settled into the bones, heavy but quiet, the kind that came from years of trying to do the right thing without anyone noticing. He sat alone at a sunlit cafe table near the window, fingers wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee, watching the shadows of passing trees ripple across the floor. The blind date was supposed to have started 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes was long enough to understand a pattern, long enough to accept that some things simply did not show up, no matter how politely you invited them. If this opening already pulled something awake in you, take a second to like the video, comment, share it, and subscribe to the channel Shadowverse if you believe in kindness and second chances. Sometimes a small click is a quiet way of saying you still believe. Armin was a single father, though that label never quite captured the full shape of his life. He was a morning packer of lunches, a late-night checker of homework, a weekend repairman for broken toys and cracked hopes. His daughter, Noor, was 7 and carried the kind of curiosity that made strangers smile and teachers pause. Her mother had passed away 3 years earlier, leaving behind a silence that Armin learned to live around instead of through. Every decision he made had since been measured against one simple question: would this make Noor feel safe? The blind date itself had felt like a risk. It came through a friend of a friend, wrapped in reassurance and gentle pressure. Armin had agreed only because it was daytime, only because the cafe was bright and close to the park where Noor was attending an art workshop. He had told himself this was not about romance, not really. It was about remembering how to sit across from another adult and talk about something other than grocery lists and school schedules. It was about testing whether the part of him that once dreamed still had a pulse. The cafe hummed with the soft noise of daytime life. Laptops clicked, cups clinked, sunlight spilled generously across wooden tables. Armin checked his phone again, not because he expected a message, but because it was easier than sitting with disappointment. He imagined the other person stuck in traffic, or suddenly reconsidering, or simply forgetting. Each possibility landed with a dull ache, familiar and manageable. He had learned how to manage disappointment. Parenthood had taught him that skill early and well. He stood up slowly, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor, and reached for his jacket. The date, he decided, was over. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in quiet acceptance. He left a few bills on the table, an apology to the universe for expecting anything more, and turned toward the door. That was when he noticed her. She stood just inside the entrance, sunlight framing her in a way that felt almost intentional, like the world had paused to underline the moment. Her hair was slightly wind-tousled, her expression focused and searching, as if she were scanning the room for something important she hoped she had not missed. There was urgency in her posture, not panic, but determination. She carried a canvas tote bag and the kind of presence that did not ask for attention yet somehow gathered it. Armin hesitated, caught in the awkward space between leaving and staying. He told himself this was coincidence, that cafes were full of people, that his story did not suddenly turn just because someone new entered the frame. He took another step, and then she looked directly at him. Recognition crossed her face like a soft wave, relief followed by something warmer. She moved toward him quickly, stopping just close enough to feel personal without being intrusive. In a breathless moment that seemed to stretch longer than it should have, she revealed that she was the one he had been waiting for. The blind date had not forgotten. It had simply been delayed by a chain of small, human emergencies that had nothing to do with indifference. Armin felt the ground shift under his assumptions. The tidy ending he had written in his mind unraveled, replaced by uncertainty and curiosity. He noticed the way her eyes carried both apology and resilience, the way her hands steadied as she explained herself with sincerity. She was called Zareen Malik, and her morning had begun with a flat tire, followed by helping an elderly neighbor who had fallen, followed by the kind of cascading delays that turn minutes into mountains. They returned to the table together, the coffee now cold but the space between them warming. Without formal dialogue, their connection unfolded in gestures and expressions, in the way they listened fully, as if each word mattered. Zareen spoke about her work as a community librarian, about how she believed stories were quiet healers, about how she volunteered at a literacy program on weekends. Armin shared pieces of his life carefully, mentioning Noor with pride that softened his features, explaining how his days revolved around small rituals that kept their world steady. The café seemed to brighten as the morning progressed. Outside, the city moved at a gentle pace, people crossing streets with shopping bags and purpose. Inside, Armin felt something he had not allowed himself to name in a long time. It was not excitement exactly, nor was it hope in its loudest form. It was a calm sense of being seen, of not having to perform or explain too much. Zareen listened in a way that felt rare, absorbing his words without trying to fix or polish them. Time behaved differently when he was with her. The hour stretched, unhurried, like a Sunday afternoon. When he mentioned Noor's art workshop, Zareen's face lit with genuine interest rather than polite acknowledgement. She asked thoughtful questions about parenting, about loss, about how love changes shape when it has to hold grief as well as joy. Armin felt his guard lower, not because he was careless, but because she had not tried to push it down. The challenge he carried, the one he rarely spoke aloud, was the fear of inviting someone into a life that already felt fragile. He worried about disrupting Noor's sense of security, about introducing hope only to have it leave again. Sitting across from Zareen, he realized that his struggle was not just about protecting his daughter, but about forgiving himself for surviving when someone else had not. He had built walls out of responsibility, and they had kept him safe, but also alone. Zareen shared her own quiet battles, moments of starting over, of learning patience with herself. She spoke of believing that timing was less about perfection and more about courage. The idea lingered between them like a shared secret. When the conversation eventually slowed, it felt natural rather than forced, like the end of a good chapter rather than the end of a story. They stepped outside into the full clarity of day, the sky white and blue above them. Armin noticed how the sunlight caught the edges of Zareen's smile, how the city noise softened around them. He checked the time and realized he was not late for anything, not rushing toward obligation, but walking toward possibility. The park was only a few blocks away, and he found himself imagining Noor's laugh, the way she would describe her drawings with dramatic flair. What changed that day was not the promise of romance, but the permission to try. Armin felt inspired not because everything suddenly made sense, but because it did not have to. Zareen did not ask him to be anyone other than who he was. She did not look at his past as a liability, but as a landscape that had shaped him. In her presence, he felt lighter, not unburdened, but balanced. As the afternoon unfolded, they parted with an understanding that did not need grand declarations. There was an exchange of contact information, a mutual agreement to meet again, and a shared smile that carried more meaning than words. Armin walked toward the park with a renewed awareness of the world around him, of how life could surprise you if you stayed long enough at the table. Near the end of the day, as Noor ran toward him with paint-streaked hands and shining eyes, Armin felt gratitude settle into his chest. He knew the road ahead would still have challenges, that blending lives was never simple, that love required patience and honesty. But he also knew that he no longer felt invisible to his own future. The blind date he thought was over had arrived, not just in the form of a person, but in the form of a reminder that kindness often shows up late, breathless, and sincere. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of your own second chances or quiet hopes, please like, share, and engage with this video. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. And before we close, take a moment to comment what this story made you feel or which part stayed with you the most. Your words matter more than you know. Armin looked up at the bright, ordinary sky and understood that inspiration did not always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrived in daylight, with an apology, a listening ear, and the courage to stay.